on this computer. All right, let's get started. So this year we are the leadership of all the different churches who have been to Fire and Ice before, got together and talked about what do we want to do this year? Do we want to do anything? And we kind of all said that last year was really a bummer. And if we could do something this year, it would be better than doing nothing, even if it meant lots of sort of restrictions and things, mitigation techniques in place. So we put out the feelers to all the different churches who have been involved before. St. Luke, UCC New Brighton, and Anoka UCC are the three churches who said that they might be interested in doing something better than nothing. So welcome all three of our churches. We're just chatting about what that might look like. So essentially, we are thinking that the way to do this responsibly, safely in a time of COVID, when numbers are not where we want them to be, but vaccination rates for children and youth are where we want them to be. The options that we've talked about, I'm going to talk about the options that the leadership has talked about. And I want to be really clear that this is not set in stone. This is what we as faithful leaders have gleamed as potentially the best route, but we are all flawed human beings and might be wrong. So if you have a thought or a suggestion for another way to do things, we're definitely open to that. It's really going to depend on the folks who go, what we end up doing. So we're going to build this together. So what we thought, certainly a reasonable approach would be to have each church as their own cabin. So we would have churches as essentially quarantine pods, which means that we would travel up individually in our church groups, as we often do. But instead of meeting at UCC Grand Marais and sleeping on the giant floor together, we would have three separate churches or locations that each group would have. So one church would have UCC Grand Marais. One of our members, Martha Williams, is living up there and has offered her place as a place for a group to stay. They also have access to Camp Minogen, which is right there. And so we could have a group stay at Camp Minogen. There are a couple of churches with the Presbyterian Church USA, of which I am affiliated, that I am waiting to hear back to hear if that would be an option too. So essentially we would all go up Friday night as we normally do, find whichever location our pod has been assigned and sleep there overnight, have some programming. So it's always been kind of loosey-goosey, informal time. We do sort of large group introductions. All the groups will essentially know each other, maybe not deeply, but there will be some sort of programming that will make that sort of introductory small time meaningful. Imagining what this looks like as a small group intensive retreat with some inter-church relationship building potential puts a new framework for us for leadership. So instead of sort of building everything around the large communal space time that we have in the main lodge, the weekend would be built around cabin time with some large group outdoor activity time built in. So there would be more small group meaningful activities. So this is sort of a way to build community and deepen relationships of our church groups after a time of some strained distance from each other. And then we would have some of that group building time in the main lodge or during the day outside. If we do this trip, and it still is an if, we haven't actually signed any papers and confirmed everything. So we're waiting to hear what you all feel like and see who, if anyone, registers. But if we do, we would be the first winter camping group that the Boundary Waters Canoe area has hosted. They were closed last winter. They have hosted camps this past year and done a lot of this sort of like one group is in a pod. They split people up so they have smaller numbers in each cabin. A 50% capacity for each cabin is what has been talked about. which would limit the number of registrants from each church. We are toying with the number of 10 as a cap from each church, which would mean that we would have a total of 30 people at the camp itself, maybe at most, and that is maybe some flexibility based on the realities of who registers. There is some wiggle room, but in general, that's what we're targeting is 10 per church and 1 church per cabin. The staff that would be working would all be tested when they arrive on Friday for the weekend. So they would know that their staff is has negative COVID tests. There are rapid tests available, and they do also have some empty quarantine cabins if that eventuality were to occur. If someone comes down with some, a cough or something, some other symptom, we would have a rapid test on hand to give it to them, and they would be quarantined in one of those cabins until someone came up to get them. Now, this is not out of the question. We have often had parents have to come up. That is kind of the reality of this trip, is if your kid gets violently ill, you need to come get them. This is just more of a less violently ill and more of just, if you're ill with COVID, you need to come get them. But they would be safe, they would be warm and inside while they're being quarantined. They have rapid tests available. I think we would also provide some. I know St. Luke would provide a few. I'm inviting all the churches to provide some. You're welcome to send your kid with one to provide that yourself, sort of tuck it in the first aid supplies that we request. For campers, mitigation techniques, we would require vaccination, proof of vaccination upon registering. So if you register, I would be following up with you to ask for proof of vaccination, to have that on file. And then we would also do at least a 48-hour in advance COVID test to make sure that there isn't any sort of breakthrough case. So Thursday or Friday, before we leave, we would ask you to take a rapid test or to go into your doctor's office to provide another test, just to add another layer of protection there. All indoor activities in common areas like Pine Cliff and the Trail Shack will be masking. Each individual church would be able to decide what they want to do with their cabin. And that's really going to depend upon who registers and what everyone feels comfortable with. I have not made a determination about St. Luke. I'm going to wait and see what people want to do and what people feel comfortable with in terms of masking in the cabin, if we can think of ourselves as a quarantine group, or if we just mask until bedtime. And that's just the reality of it. Indoor dining is still going to happen because we have to eat. And there's no real way to move the food from the dining hall to the individual cabins. So that would be the one time that we would be all together maskless indoors. Now, the eating area of Pine Cliff, for those of you who maybe haven't been, Pine Cliff is the main lodge, and there is a section of it that's sort of off to the side that is for the tables. It is a large rectangular space, and they have taken out tables. Every other table, they've taken one out. So we would eat as a pod. Every church would have one table that they would eat at. And then there would be about a 12-foot gap before you get to another cabin. All the food would be brought by masked staff. And then busing would be, again, we would put masks on to bus back. So the only time we'd be maskless is when we were sitting at the table with food in front of us as we're about to eat. Portable air purifiers are another means of mitigation. I have information on relatively affordable hospital grade air purifiers that are portable. If other churches want to provide them for their cabins, I am planning on bringing 2 for whatever cabin our church stays in, the 2 that I have. And I'm also planning on bringing one of our large hospital grade air purifiers for Pine Cliff. That will cycle the air in Pine Cliff in about an hour. If the other churches wanted to pitch in and get another one, we could cycle that air in a half hour. But that is several $100s of expense that then you could either give to the camp or keep for your own use. I have that information and I can share that readily as needed. As I said, we set a soft cap at 10 per church, aiming for a 50% capacity. With that, we are prioritizing registration. So seniors who were unable to go last year and their parents have priority registration. Youth who have attended before, young adults and upper class high schoolers, and then some extra discussion would be needed for any middle schoolers who are interested. We recognize that those who are in high school can readily wear a mask, and the younger we get, the more easy it is to forget about the importance of wearing a mask. So we have to take case-by-case registration. And that is sort of a tiered priority based on sort of seniority and age, recognizing that those who are graduating this year may never have this chance again if they go off to college and never come back. So we would prioritize seniors last year and then seniors this year, and then upper class high school, and then looking into middle school if all those other slots don't get taken by the church. And that middle schooler is able to responsibly wear a mask indoors without having to be hassled all the time, because we don't want to have to hassle people all the time to wear their masks. So this is a different year. We are offering something. We are thinking about how to offer something meaningful, better than nothing, a chance to escape, to reflect, to grow as a community and deepen relationships. There would be added emphasis on being outdoors. We often push them to be outdoors. We would have more activities, more supervision, more ways to people to play outdoors and have fun outdoors. More availability to return to your specific cabin, as opposed to hanging out in the Pine Cliff Lodge. You'd be hanging out in your cabin. And more cabin group activities. So like a cabin closing every night that is structured to develop more community experience. We would still have our shared communion time, which is an outdoor communion offering that is often started indoors. And we're starting to imagine what that would look like to begin a worship experience in our small cabin groups, and then journey to a central point where we share communion together. I think it could be really meaningful and interesting, but it all depends on you and if you feel comfortable in this experience and if your youth wants to attend. So that being my spiel, I would open it up if there is anyone here who has any questions.
Would they still do the overnight, digging out the shelter, the Quincy, I think it's called?
Quincy's, yes.
Yeah.
We have talked to the staff and they are welcome to build the Quincy's. We would not be able to sleep in the Quincy's, because the only reason that we can sleep in the Quincy's, or at least try to, is because if you get too cold, you scurry right up the hill to Pine Cliff at 2 a.m. when it's pitch black. You wouldn't be able to do that because Pine Cliff isn't sort of a central hub that a couple of different students from different camps could go to. So you'd have to go back to your cabin, which is a much longer, more dangerous trek in the middle of the night, 20 below. So we can build them. I plan on building one. We wouldn't be sleeping in them this year.
Okay, thanks.
Great question. Any other questions? Okay, well, if we don't have any other questions, that's the information. I encourage you to reach out to your faith leader and discern if this is going to be a good trip. We want to make this decision, I think by the end of the month, or at least early into December. We often have registration going until Christmas, but the sooner we know, the better. So if you know you're a hard no, please let your faith leader know so that they can sort of tick you off as we start to see who is interested in going. If you're a firm yes, go ahead and register. You can register on our website, stluke.mn, or email your church's faith leader to register. Okay. Thank you so much for your time here today, and May God be with us as we navigate this unique and trying time.
Thanks, Nora. Thanks, Nora.